Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Russ LeBlanc, your personal NEC consultant and code expert. In this video, I'm going to be discussing GFCI protection for receptacles when we replace a receptacle. Okay, let's take a look at the 2023 edition first. And we're looking in 406.4D3 in the 2023. Here's what it says. The main rule, and there's an exception we're going to look at too. The main rule says this: GFCI protection for receptacles shall be provided where replacements are made at receptacles that are required to be GFCI protected elsewhere in this code. And ground fault circuit interrupters shall be listed. Now, just one of many examples. 210.8 provides requirements for GFCI protection for receptacles. There's other areas in the code that may require receptacles to be GFCI protected. Okay, and so you would look there as applicable. For this one example, we're going to look in 210.8. And specifically, we're going to look in 210.8A12 just as one of many, many, many examples. 210.8A12 requires GFCI protection for receptacles in laundry areas of dwelling units. Okay? So that would be for new installations. If we installed receptacles new in this laundry area, we would have to provide GFCI protection. And 406.4D3 says, well, if you replace the receptacle, you're also going to need GFCI protection. Now, there's an exception we need to look at. All right, here's the exception as worded from the 2023 edition. And there's some quirks we got to talk about here. The wording's not perfect, but we're going to break that down. Here's what it says. Where the outlet box size will not permit the installation of a GFCI type of receptacle, the receptacle is permitted to be replaced with a new receptacle of the existing type, where GFCI protection is provided and the receptacle is marked GFCI protected, and also no equipment ground, in accordance with 406.4D2A, B, or C as applicable. Now let's break that down because not all of it makes sense. First point I want to make is GFCI protection is still required for that receptacle. The way this is worded does not allow you to omit GFCI protection. That's the first thing. And we also have to know that, GFCI protection does not have to be in the form of a GFCI type of receptacle. All right, we can put in a GFCI breaker. We can put in a faceless GFCI, or we can provide GFCI protection through another receptacle. We don't have to put a GFCI receptacle in that particular box. Okay, well, I think most people would probably know that, right? There's lots of ways we can provide GFCI protection. It doesn't have to be a GFCI type of receptacle. So if you think about it, why was this exception even needed? If you tell me you have to provide, GFCI protection for this receptacle, well, as an installer, an electrician, I know that there's all kinds of GFCI devices. It could be a GFCI receptacle, a GFCI breaker, a faceless GFCI. It doesn't have to be a GFCI type of receptacle. And then why would I mark the receptacle no equipment ground if there actually is an equipment grounding conductor there? That doesn't make any sense at all. So, in my humble opinion, that exception was pretty much useless. Like, what purpose did it serve? Right? Okay, you're basically telling me you don't have to put in a GFCI type of receptacle if the box is too small, but you do still have to provide GFCI protection. Okay, great. Anyways. That's going to be revised in a very, very big way. All right, I think anybody who's watching this video probably knows that there's different types of GFCIs, right? You have a GFCI receptacle, GFCI breakers, and the faceless GFCIs. There's 3 examples right up there in the graphic. All right, so if the GFCI type of receptacle doesn't fit in the box, then put in a GFCI breaker, or feed through another GFCI receptacle, or feed through a faceless GFCI. You still have to provide GFCI protection for that replacement receptacle, according to the 2023. Now, big changes happen in 2026. Let's look at the general rule, right? Before we look at the exception. Not any major changes here. The main body is still the same, other than they take out the requirements that GFCIs be listed from this section, right? We don't need to say it here because it's a requirement anyway, so we don't need to say it again. So that listing requirement is not needed in this section. I don't want you to think that the GFCIs aren't required to be listed. They are absolutely required to be listed. 406.2 is going to require wiring devices. That's going to be a new term for 2026, wiring devices to be listed. And that would include receptacles, and even general use snap switches are a wiring device too. So they have to be listed. And then as far as GFCI devices, well, 210.8 already requires GFCI devices to be listed too. So we don't need to say it again in 406.12d3. So no big deal. Not really any technical changes there, just removing some superfluous information. Now, the exception. Big changes in the exception. Here's what the exception says, or is proposed to say, for 2026. So barring any last minute changes, this is what it's going to say. The receptacle shall be permitted to be replaced with a new receptacle of the existing type if all of the following conditions exist. There are 3 conditions. Number 1, the outlet box size will not permit installation of a GFCI type of receptacle. So kind of similar to the last code, right? So you can't just take out the receptacle and put in a GFCI because a GFCI type of receptacle because the box is too small. Okay, so that has to be applicable. And then the second thing is there's no other place upstream from that box where you could put in a GFCI receptacle and provide GFCI protection through that receptacle to the receptacle you're replacing. Okay, now keep in mind, if you do that, you might be replacing 2 receptacles. You wanted to replace this one, well, a GFCI won't fit here, so I'm going to go over here and replace this receptacle and put in a GFCI. So now that's 2 replacements you're making. So just keep that in mind. Okay, but this is saying, well, there is no place upstream that we could put in a GFCI receptacle and feed through it to protect this one that I'm replacing. All right, and then the third thing is a GFCI breaker cannot provide the required GFCI protection. So I think that third component there, that third condition, that's going to be subject to some varying degrees of interpretation because we might not know exactly what they're talking about there. Here's what I think the intent is. I think the intent of this revision is to have the user and the installer exhaust all their options for providing GFCI protection for that receptacle before being granted that exception to essentially omit GFCI protection, right? We want to exhaust all other options. First option is to provide GFCI protection. Well, you can't because of these 3 things. Okay, then you can do it without GFCI protection. Well, why is this exception needed? Well, believe it or not, relief is probably needed for some existing installations where GFCI protection might be incompatible, for example, with the existing wiring arrangement. Now, let me give you some specific examples of that. And this is just one example that you might have other stories where it's just not going to work. GFCI devices will not work with a previously installed electric dryer where that dryer frame is bonded to the neutral and that dryer incorporates a steam feature and is connected to a copper water line. All right, the GFCI that GFCI device, the breaker most likely, is going to keep tripping because the water line is bonded to the neutral in 2 places. If you think about it, right? If everything's done correctly, the water line should be bonded to the neutral at the service. And at this dryer, with the steam feature, you have to run a water line to this electric dryer so you can provide water for the steam. And for an old or an existing dryer, the frame could very well be bonded to the neutral. That was very common for older installations. And so now you have two paths for neutral. You have the neutral conductor in the cable that was run to the dryer, and because that neutral is bonded to the frame of the dryer and the water pipe is bonded to the frame of the dryer, well, the water pipe can actually carry neutral current and just keep tripping that GFCI. It absolutely will not work. All right, here's an example of an electric dryer with a steam feature. All right, so you're going to run a water line to this dryer. Well, maybe not you, but somebody's going to run a water line and connect it to this dryer. Now, these are the instructions for this dryer on the screen here. And in the instructions for that dryer, it says the dryer is provided with a 3-wire connection. It's a 3-wire connection from the factory. That's how they're made. That's how they're shipped. It's going to have the neutral bonded to the frame, just like you see in the graphics up on the screen there. You see the type of receptacle, and then you'll see the wiring connections for the dryer with the neutral bonded to the frame. You can see that in that yellow highlight there. Now, this was permitted for new installations prior to 1996. Since that time, the code has only permitted this method for existing installations. Well, that means there's probably thousands and thousands, maybe millions, I don't know, lots of these types of dryers out there. So if you try to replace a receptacle and then provide GFCI protection, it just might not work. The GFCI might just keep tripping, because it's just not compatible. That arrangement is not compatible. And there could be other situations, right? This is just one of many. I know, for example, some electric cooking appliances just are not compatible with GFCIs. They just won't work. Those appliances, especially older ones, they would never evaluated for, being connected to a GFCI and, not tripping it. So it's very likely you are going to encounter this at some point where the GFCI is just not compatible with the existing equipment and the existing wiring arrangement. Now, as far as the product standards, they still allow the neutral to ground connection, right? For electric ranges, electric ovens, electric cooktops, and electric clothes dryers, the product standard still permits grounding and bonding of the frame through the neutral conductor. You don't have to run an equipment ground, and that's permitted. So some relief is needed for these existing installations. You are not going to be forced to rewire the entire circuit just because the older arrangement is not compatible with a GFCI. All right? In fact, you can just replace the receptacle and omit GFCI protection if you meet all 3 conditions. And that makes sense, right? There's just no way. It would be too much of an overreach, in my opinion, to force installers to rewire the whole circuit because you just wanted to replace a receptacle. Maybe the receptacle is not the right color, or maybe it's just broken, or they're doing some renovations and they just want a new receptacle. Oh, sorry, too bad. You have to rewire the whole circuit. And by the way, you have to change the cord and rewire your electric dryer, or maybe even buy a new dryer just because you wanted to replace the receptacles. So that is way too much of an overreach, in my opinion. So in this situation, you're going to get permission to just take out that receptacle and put in the same type of receptacle with no GFCI protection. I kind of like that. You should be able to do that. You should be able to just take out what is there and put the same exact type of thing back in. If it was code compliant when it was originally installed, in my opinion, you should be able to put that same exact thing right back in. We'll see how this plays out. I think I like this rule. I think it's going to provide some real relief to installers out there who might be frustrated trying to provide GFCI protection as required now, right? Right now, the 2023, if you replace a receptacle, you have to provide GFCI protection. There's no relief. You have to provide GFCI protection. So I think this could provide some much needed relief. We'll see how it goes. Thank you for watching. More videos coming. Please visit my website, russellblank.net, for more information. See you in the next video.